Yeah. Okay. Excellent.
This meeting is being recorded.
Oh, fantastic. The meeting is being recorded. Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm just gonna, as a first order of business, I just want to make a statement before we get started with today's session. The conference organizers have asked that I remind everyone that this is a conference that is characterized by mutual respect and collaboration, and that everyone registered and participating in these sessions has agreed to abide by the anti-discrimination, harassment, and retaliation policy. I'm going to place the link of this policy in the chat for any of you who'd like to refer to it. But essentially all we're asking is that all of you treat each other with respect and consideration for the extent of this session. So with that out of the way, let me warmly welcome all of you to our session on perspectives on water and peace. My name is Shana McLean. I'm the Disasters Program Manager for NASA's Applied Sciences Program, and I'll serve as the moderator for today's event. I'm joined by my colleagues Liliana Pimentel, Mara Tignino, Lydia Cano-Pecharoman, and Camille Marquette. We're all members of the Environmental Peacebuilding Association's interest group on water. And it's great actually to see that a lot of our members are also attending this session today as well, so welcome. And what we wanted to do is share all of the different perspectives, well, at least some, let's say a snapshot of some of the different perspectives on water and peace from the different backgrounds of some of our members. If you're interested in learning more about the interest group on water, please do let us know. We'll be happy to connect you to the group. Mara, Lily, and I were the former co-chairs of the group, and we really appreciated the experience to be able to work with such an incredible group of water and peace professionals. We now have Lena Salome as the co-chair, or as the new chair for the interest group, and I'm glad to see she's in attendance too, so welcome to Lena. And so now I'm going to take a moment to introduce our speakers. We're going to turn it over to them to present their different perspectives, and then we'll go from there into the Q&A portion of the session. I would just ask that standard rules, please keep all of your mics muted while everyone's presenting. We'll save all the questions till the end, although if you'd like to put questions in the chat along the way, that would be awesome. And once we get to the Q&A portion, I'll start pulling things from all of you, and we look forward to your lively participation. So do ask questions. Okay, so for introductions, Liliana Pimentel is an architect and urban planner and a PhD candidate at the University of Brazil. She also works for the Brazil Ministry of Regional Development on issues including environmental sanitation, regional and conservation planning, and climate justice. Dr. Mara Tignino is a reader at the Institute for Environmental Sciences at the University of Geneva and the lead legal specialist of the Platform for International Water Law at the Geneva Water Hub. Lydia Cano-Pecharoman is a PhD researcher at MIT's Department of Urban Studies and Planning, specializing in policy planning for extreme weather events. And last but not least, we have Camille Marquette, who works for International Alert as a peacebuilding advisor supporting work on climate security and conflict relating to access to natural resources. So a warm welcome to all of our speakers. Lily, you're first up. I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Shana, so much. Thank you for all the people present and the audience and the colleagues in this panel. I am not maybe making a structured presentation, but I can show for sure some images I separate to support my speech, but I will be more than happy to later on share with you data and anything you get interested in regarding the things I'm speaking about. So just to introduce, we have think on this panel talking about climate change impacts and the the water and peace building, the perspectives on peace building related to water, but looking a little bit on climate change and also other plans, other MIAs, and other agreements and targets shared by countries, and how to mainstream those things. So in Brazil, I have been working with the Biodiversity Secretariat in the past, and nowadays I am back to water resources management. So looking at how we can mainstream water management and the biodiversity targets and commitments in the same country. So this is a little bit about my speech. And in fact, I will not bring much data for you, but more some reflections and share a little bit the thinking that I have on the last 20 years working with both things and how to balance this. So I bring some country facts and considerations about water management in Brazil, even if a lot of you may know a lot about our frameworks and laws, and some considerations about the MIAs and the on this and how we can mainstream and things like this. So Brazil has more than 200 million inhabitants, and half of them has no idea about what SDGs are for, what are the SDGs, what are the multilateral environment agreements, what are the targets, and in fact, doesn't matter much what we sign in agreements if the population is not aware of these commitments we made as a country. So we never reach any target and any objectives, and we just postpone. It's this sensation that I have that we are always postpone the achievement of these agreements. So Brazil is the 5th largest country, and in most of the data, we are in the top 10 because the large country we are, the territory we have. So we hold 20% of the world's identified species, and about 10% of this, according to the data in 2014, are already threatened. 12% of the fresh water is in our territory, and we are divided in 6 biomes. We are mega diverse and a hotspot, and we have one of the largest coastal line, and also the line border, the coastal and territorial continental border. 10% of our municipalities is on the border, with a concentration in South Brazil. We have several indigenous lands in that area, and very sensitive ecosystems like Pantanal, and a lot of interest places like La Plata River Basin, Guarani Aquifer. We have a unique and vulnerable wetlands and other spots growing of urbanization along the borders. So this is something to worry about. We have 6 biomes, and very, very diverse, very different in terms of cultural and fauna and any other geographic aspects. And regarding the policy making process, one of the biggest difficulties is we have different territorial bases. So for water supply and sanitation, for example, we use administrative borders. And for water management, we use hydrographic regions. and also looking at the integrated water management. We have since 1934 our law called the water law, and in a participatory process, this law has been developed, and until 97, when we stated a national policy of water resources, and we create the National Council for Water Resources. In 2000, we have the agency, the regulation, and the first national plan was at the MDG's time in 2006. In 2019, after the second review of our plan, we have a new administrative arrangement, which changes a lot the way that the National Council and also the way that the national agency works. So we had new decrees, and we are now in the process to finalize a public consultation and all the participatory process for the new water resources plan for the next 40 years. So we have in our law some principles. Water in Brazil is recognized as a public good. We recognize the economic value, and we have defined some priority uses. First of all, human consumption and animal needs. It's very, very important because when we sit to negotiate in a scenario of water scarcity, of severe drought, as we faced in several places in Brazil years ago, to have this priority uses helps a lot. So the watershed for us is the territorial unit, and all the process is participatory. We have a framework of water management. So in Brazil, we don't have hierarchy between federal government and the state government regarding to water policy. It's in a collaborative way and participatory way. We have also the instruments settled and the plans made by watersheds, state level, and federal level. And the federal level is the plan we are right now reviewing. We have also some instruments, and they work together to close the cycle we need for water management. So ideally, we have a classification of water bodies, but looking at the future, what we want in the future. And based on this, we can plan, we can authorize withdrawals, and we can charge for how much water you use. And this money ideally comes back to the system to keep things flowing. And it's applied in the same watershed you generate. And we have a huge system of information that is run by Ana. Ana in 2019 also get under his mandate, water and sanitation. So what changed in 2019 is we started to not just look at management and policy, but also bring together technical issues related to infrastructure in a more broad way, inserted in the same planning and the same team working on this. So we have data enough about natural and artificial. We know the domains. We have more than thousands points of monitoring of water quality, water quantity in each of these basins, in water courses all over Brazil. in a collaborative way as well with other agencies like sanitation companies, mining, other governmental officials. But even so, looking at all these data, in the last 30 years, Brazil lost about 15% of the water surface, and it happens in all countries. Even so, we monitor hydroclimatic aspects and social and economic aspects. All this is taken in account in our plans. So the use of water has changed a lot. The more recent data, the urban area in Amazon is increasing, which is a very sensitive point when we are talking how to mainstream biodiversity and vulnerable areas. And we look at the urbanization sprawl we are having over there, and the water management system and information help us to take this look and to understand what is going on in the territory. So we have different availability of water and the distribution over the country, and the rainfall variation is also very prone, being affected by the climate variation we are seeing everywhere. So what is happening is the downs and the high points of these curves, they are getting more high and more down and in a shortened time. So the main challenges we have, it's hydropower, water scarcity, expansion, urbanization, and some big areas very being affected by droughts. In 2019, all the water sector came out of the environmental ministry, and is now where I work. They just create the Ministry of Regional Development. So it brought together 3 different ministries, and they create not anymore the National Secretariat of Water Management, but water security. And looking at the evolution of water security concept, because we have a second plan that works together with the water plan, we have a water security plan that is more devoted to infrastructure and sanitation and other buildings and infrastructure we need in the country. So when we look at the water security concept and the timeline frame, we see that it's coming in evolution. Maybe it's not even closed at all. They are incorporating some aspects in each review of this concept. So the different experts brought this concepts, and it was used in the water security plan in Brazil. And they take place looking at the 4 dimensions of water security. And it made me think it's the first reflection. How is important that we policymakers, academia, that we take care to really realize what the words that we use in these reports. Because when we put acceptable level of risk related to droughts and floods, what is this acceptable level of risk? Who is in risk? What is acceptable for who? If I look in the map, I just look at numbers, I may have an idea what is acceptable. But if it's someone I really love affected by these floods or droughts. What is acceptable for us? So just a reflection. And the same things happen in the multilateral agreements. We have a national environmental system. Since 2019, we are having a lot of changes administratively and also in the law and regulations. And if we look at the environmental agreements and reports and studies, what they are talking about. So if we look at the Convention of the Biodiversity and we look at the targets established by all the countries for 2020, only 6 were met. And the report brings us, but it's not too late. If we all take actions for 2050, it's the same thing I see in the IPCC reports. They stress it clearly that we need more ambitious commitments. The NDCs are not enough. So, but we still having time, while some experts are talking about tipping points for several of the threats in environment and security. So many countries will also not meet the SDGs, and we already know this, as we could not meet the MDGs and we could not meet the 21st agenda previously. So working for 30 years on this and looking what is being made, especially in Brazil, I think the most difficult thing for us is not how to mainstream these objectives and these targets and the water management and environmental conservation. The difficult thing is not to mainstream those things. It's very clear to everyone what we have to do, how those things connect. It's kind of obvious. But even so, what we see is reduction of space for participatory process, changes in the law, protected areas and indigenous land recognition have stopped. The law of transparency is not being observed on this. If you look at the websites and the data from the government nowadays, everything is stopped in 2018. Financial resources are not being used.
Lily, I just want to warn you, you can probably have 2 more minutes and then we'll have to transition, okay?
It's okay, it's okay. Reduction of workforce and the records on deforestation, environmental crimes is arising. We are losing forest, water, conflicts are increasing. So we have the decade of restoration. And if we look at the targets we have on all these national plans, we have a lot of space to do something. So to not still feeling like this, the difficulty is not to mainstream, as I was saying. The difficulty is how we really connect the targets on the local level, in the ground. And the ecological corridors may be a solution, as we have a decade for restoration. So using the mainstream, using the streams and rivers to recover and to reconnect forest, land, may be a solution easy to take. If we think that we are like a family living in the same house, it's the same thing that countries in the same word, sharing the same word. We just have to work on scale. So leaving the library yesterday, I didn't took a picture, but makes me think, why this guy? Because the sand was like this. Why this guy is parking his bicycle when you have an empty place? And he is not wrong. I am wrong because I don't understand why he's not doing what he was supposed to do. And when we comp and when we do not understand why that simple thing happens, we are comp with this and we are comp with this. And we will not meet our targets if we do not understand what is not being seen for us, to people to really do what they have to do for everyone to meet their targets. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Let's turn it over now to Mara Tignino. Mara, over to you.
Thank you. Just I try to share my my screen. So many thanks. It is a pleasure to join this panel. And so the perspective that I would like to share today with you on the linkages between water and peace. It is the increasing movement existing on the recognition of the rights of nature. So one of our panelists, Lydia, knows this topic probably better than me. Well, for sure, she started before me to look at this topic. So I'm sure that we will complement also for the thoughts on this topic. So I know this research is based on a paper that I'm writing for the Comparative Law Academy, and I can see now from an international law perspective that this is really not the recognition of the rights of nature is a comparative law matter, and everything it starts from really comparing the different experience of the countries recognizing these rights. So maybe the first observation that I would like now to share with you, it is that we have this rising of a global transnational movement, the starting, the beginning of the recognition of the rights of nature started in the 70s with a paper from written by Stone. But after that, there were few scholars that followed his approach about to give to recognize the nature as an actor and the subject of domestic law, or even as an actor of international law. But since the 2000, we can see that in different countries with different modalities, there is an increasing recognition of the rights of nature. So the first an observation that can be made about this practice, it is that we can have domestic legislation recognizing the rights to specific elements of nature, and such domestic legislation can be adopted at the national but also at the subnational level. So we can have like constitutions, so for example, in the case of Bolivia and Ecuador, so we have the constitution that recognizes the rights of nature. But for example, I think that a trend that is increasingly developing, it is also that at the subnational level, so municipality also, for example, recognize rights to elements of nature. So for example, rivers, national parks, glaciers, mountains, and also together with the domestic legislations, we have also decisions of courts. And in this case, I would like and I will go again in this topic. The decision from the jurisdictions of Colombia are really emblematic of this recognition of the rights of nature. Also because there is not domestic law recognizing these rights, so it is really an interpretation from the judges that they build in a very creative way also this recognition of the rights of nature. And also in Asia we have an interesting example in India and in Bangladesh. Although I think that the Colombian case is more emblematic because I think that the courts follow the approach, while in India, in Bangladesh, it is not really clear what decision have not been nullified by the judgment that have followed. Then now we have also the case of New Zealand that is very interesting, because it is a kind of settlement between the national governments and the Maori tribal community. But some elements that are common, we can see in this in domestic law and courts decision. It is this attribution of the legal personality to the elements of nature, and we will see what does it mean in practice. Then also this appointment of guardians of the river or of these elements of nature, and then another element also that follows from the legal personality and from the attribution of the legal personality. It is not the legal standing of nature before national court. That it is also from the legal perspective a very interesting movement. And so what does it mean in practice? This. So I think that from the international law perspective, maybe it is still early to see really what is the impact of this comparative practice on the development of international law, but we can say that in general these legislations and the national case law, they request, we can say, to the international legal scholars maybe to rethink or to adapt the classical principles of international environmental law, like the principle of prevention or precaution, and ground this principle on an ecocentric approach. So not based only to the benefits to the human beings, but also considering these principles like dissociated for the benefits of the human beings, but also for the benefits of the nature as such. So we can say that in international environmental law increasingly, and I will mention afterwards a case from the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, there is this recognition of the rights of nature through the references to national practices. And we can say that from an international law perspective, the building also of general principles or customary law can also have its origin in national practices. So maybe we are assisting in such change of international environmental law. And still from the case law that I read I think that the principles of sustainable development, prevention, precaution still have their pertinence, even if they can be grounded in a different approach that is not anymore anthropocentric but ecocentric. And so we have, of course, many challenges in the implementation of the rights of nature. So one of the first challenges is how to identify the guardians of the stewards of the rights of nature. So we in the practice we have countries have adopted different approaches. For example, in India, in Bangladesh, we have national governmental authorities. In New Zealand, the guardians are appointed by the Maori tribal community and by in Colombia, it is also the guardians have been appointed by the court. If I'm wrong, please Lydia correct me afterwards. And so there is also a challenge. It is there is a lack. I mean, in these countries in general, there can be a lack of appropriate funding to implement these legal rights of nature. And also, I think that in general, it is important that these bodies, these guardians, have also an independence towards the governmental authorities. And so two emblematic cases. These two emblematic cases from the Colombian jurisdiction: the Atrato River case and the Amazonian rainforest case. And I think also it is complementing in a way the presentation of Lily, because we can say that so in Colombia the Amazonian rainforest as a legal personality is a subject of rights. So what is the implication for example, Brazil that share the Amazonian rainforest? And then also in this jurisprudence, we can see that the courts have decided stronger remedies measure. Also, there are reporting requirements to the court, and also it is interesting to see that this judgment has been followed by other cases recognizing the legal personality to other rivers. So regarding the recognition of the Amazonian rainforest as a subject of rights, I think this case is also interesting because one of the decision also of the court, it is not the conclusion of an intergenerational pact aiming at reducing deforestation and greenhouse emissions. So this is something new also that we can see in a judgment adopted by a court. And also again, as I said before, it is interesting that the judges referred to instruments of international law, environmental law and human rights law. So we can see that there is still a relevance of international environmental law, even if nature is considered as a subject of rights as such. And so I would like to try to connect these domestic practices to international law, and maybe one of the trend that is more interesting for the as a parallel movement to the rights of the nature. It is the global recognition of the human right to an healthy environment, that it was only recognized this October by the Human Rights Council at the global level. But already the advisory opinion of 2018 by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, that interestingly was requested again by Colombia, set out, developed the reasoning about the link between environment and human rights. And it is not the first international case where we have a clear recognition also of the rights of nature as such. And this also was taken again in a contentious case between Nuestra Tierra Association and Argentina of 2020. So this is to show how this anthropocentric and ecocentric perspective can go hand in hand and can be complementary. So from what can be the reflection for the linkages between the rights of nature and peace. So one of the there are only possible options so that we can think about. For example, the inclusion of the rights of nature and the legal personality of rivers in transboundary agreements. And for example, an example that can be mentioned, it is the Farakka Treaty between India and Bangladesh that should be revised in 2026. And so maybe not this case law from Indian and Bangladesh national jurisdictions can have an influence on the negotiations or on the revisions of the treaty. So national litigation also can bring the recognition of the rights of nature. So maybe like a question on the side of the devil can be, but so if we recognize the rights of nature, we can have more litigation. So maybe this can be a source of tension at the local level. So we can see also on the other side, and then I think, especially in the case of Bangladesh, one should consider also that the implementation of the rights of nature can have an impact on the social inequities in a country. So this is very different, for example, from the case of Colombia, at least from the readings that I had. But in the case of Bangladesh, following the judgment recognize the legal personality to all rivers of the country, there were some measures that caused that the local communities had to leave they had to move from their current location near the river, and so there was also a problem of displacement of the population, compensation to these local communities. And then, of course, we need also to think how to adapt the principle of international environmental law to this new perspective based on the value of nature in itself. So this is what I wanted to share, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mara. Lydia, let's turn it over to you.
Can you see my screen?
I can.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. And it is a real pleasure to be here. And I feel so lucky to be presenting after Mara, because she did such an excellent job at bringing us the entire international perspective on the rights of nature, and also all these legal details and complicated concepts that she really made friendly for the audience. So really excited to continue digging into this topic. And moving from the more of the international perspective, what the project that I want to introduce today is about is trying to kind of disentangle a little bit what are the implications that the rights of nature have when planning, and in particular when planning for the management of water resources and climate adaptation. Although I already can warn you that many of the findings expand beyond that realm. But the idea is to, from the socio-technical imaginaries perspective, and I included the definition of this in the screen. It is a mouthful of a definition, but basically the idea behind is that the way we understand sustainable management under a certain technology or premise, in this case, the rights of nature, will, as a result, inevitably shape the plans and actions that are meant to perform that vision that we have. In this case, how we envision what are the rights of nature are going to guide how we govern and manage natural resources and also livelihoods. And this is what I'm trying to see with the case of the Atrato River. So the Atrato River in Colombia was accorded rights by the Colombia's Constitutional Court in 2016. And the unique characteristic about this ruling is that it was it mandated the creation of action plans to address these social and environmental challenges faced by the river, which, as Mara was saying before, not other rulings don't necessarily do. So it is an opportunity, or it was an opportunity, the fact that these action plans were created already 5 years ago, and there has been some time in between to using content analysis and also interviews, archival research, etc., to kind of understand how this concept of the rights of nature has shaped planning at the community level. And my intention is sharing with you 3 categories of findings and also provide an environmental peace building angle for each of them. And I hope to be brief and happy to expand more as later in the discussion. So the first set of findings show how the rights of nature shape the planning process sort of bi-directionally, in terms of how nature was not only given a voice and a seat at the deciding table, but also the opposite. So what I mean by that is, on one hand, as Mara was explaining, guardians were given a voice to speak up for nature. And while initially from the ruling emanated that 2 guardians would be appointed, in debated how and who would become this representative, actually the community reinterpreted the court ruling and divided the responsibility of such representation into 14 guardians. And the idea was that together they would represent the river on behalf of the community. And I include here in the presentation their own words explaining this, as a sole guardian would have not known the entirety of the river, as the river and the landscapes of the river change from the place of the river's birth towards its end. But also, what is more, the rights of nature, by introducing the concept of biocultural rights, actually give a voice to riparian communities themselves, that a voice they didn't necessarily have before. So actually, biocultural rights are referenced not only in the court ruling, but also in many documents around this court ruling, and constantly define these rights as ethnic communities' rights to manage their territories and govern their natural resources in accordance with their own laws, customs, and traditions, and hence it is imperative that they have a voice in the planning process. In terms of peace building, these biocultural rights are understood to emanate from this kind of deep intrinsic connection of the community with nature. And this is what translates in the entire process of the creation of these plans, and also the implementation in the engagement of several stakeholders. For instance, some of the plans were collectively built with entities at the national level, together with not only guardians, but also community representatives. And other plans were brought to what is called mesas subregionales, or sub-regional workshops across the basin for input and also further discussion of the implications of the plans. And what we found is that the tailoring of these plans to the community's needs was identified as sort of a conflict prevention strategy, particularly because in this territory, the implementation of models previously successful in other parts of the country had found difficulties in being implemented in this area. So this dialogue and inclusion of the community's vision have prevented future tensions and conflict. Another aspect or set of findings, point to the fact that considering nature as a stakeholder actually partially shaped the knowledge production process of what we know about the river. So, for instance, how do we measure and how do we assess the state of the river? And also, how do we define, how do we want the river to look like? What does it look for us a healthy river. And for a little bit of background, the court ruling actually had required that before the plans, there is an undertaking of a series of baseline studies to define what's the state of the river and where do we go from there. And what happened is that departing from business as usual, actually guardians and civil society proposed to consider not only areas that were defined as under environmental pressure, which is the business as usual in the case of these baseline studies, but also what they called as areas of environmental preservation value. And what this meant is that actually the baseline study also included areas like woodland areas with a spiritual value, indigenous reservation areas, sacred lands, such as cemeteries and lagoons, areas with medicinal plants, and also other areas that were important for the community's livelihoods. And also in the same knowledge production vein, another thing that was relevant is that when assessing or deciding how to assess the quality of the water, rather than just assessing whether there was presence of chemicals that may be damaging for humans, the definition was expanded to include thresholds that consider also the health of the river in and of itself, without considering necessarily only what is bad for humans. And the peacebuilding piece in the knowledge production process is the fact that this process constituted an environmental peacebuilding tool of its own, because the entire process used participatory action research to find out about these things. Also, tools such as social cartographic methodologies and other stakeholder engagement tools that allowed to define a flexible vision of what does it look, or what should restoration of the river look like. And this was important for conflict prevention, given that even for the guardians themselves, what the river is and what should it look like meant very different things. So this knowledge production process is kind of set to be a flexible and continuous tool. And it's said to be what they call in some of the documents a dialogue of knowledges, or diálogo de saberes, where guardians play a role not only as listeners of the river, but also as educators of the community, so that the community can collectively keep defining a vision of what does it look like to live in harmony with the river. And actually, in that sense, the plans propose to employ culture and tradition for education, using poetry, using chants, children's songs. And for instance, there is a mantra that I include in the presentation that is atrato es, atrato soy, y atrato debemos seguir siendo, which means atrato is, I am the atrato, we shall continue being atrato. And this mantra has been used by organizations as a chant to transmit knowledge on the essence of the court ruling, and so as means to enable dialogue at the community level moving forward. And finally, and I'll be quick, the final set of findings are related to the imagination of sustainable development within the Atrato River. So on the one hand, the action plans envision for the activities to be performed while also recovering traditional forms of ancestral knowledge. And this is meant to be used to decide things such as harvesting times, decide the intensity of the use of control of pests, etc. So for instance, one example is the fact that these plans, for instance, trigger an action to stop the overfishing of the fish boca chico, which is a fish traditionally eaten in the region, and that communities ask be fish in less quantities to protect the swamps surrounding the river, and also to ensure their future sources of nourishment. And also another overall change was the fact that sustainability itself in the plans and also in the documents derived from those plans is laid out not only as a nature exploitation management tools, but rather is constantly defined as a relationship between the environmental and the cultural. And one of the decrees in particular, derived from this court ruling, describes how natural resources shall be managed both as an ecological, green, environmental constitution, and on the other hand, as a cultural constitution, to contribute to the right to physical, cultural, and spiritual survival of the ethnic communities. And in that sense, the peace-building piece of this approach to sustainable development from the perspective of the rights of nature proposes the modification of territorial planning policies that traditionally have been meant for development, but without considering the participation of stakeholders. And also the modification of these territorial planning processes to advocate for the protection of collective management processes of the land, which in the past had caused a lot of legal obstacles for Afro-Colombian communities that have tried to defend those rights, and has been a source of tension. And these plans try to bring an end to those tensions. Since I'm out of time, I will be happy to discuss further the upcoming lines of research if anyone is interested, and I just want to thank you all.
Thank you so much, Lydia. That was great. Camille, let's turn it over to you.
Thank you, Shana. I will ask for confirmation that you can see my screen.
We can see it.
Thank you. So yeah, coming from International Alert, I would like to bring like a practitioner perspective on water and peace. And basically, rather than concentrating on why peace-building organizations should focus more on water, I will try to share some examples on how to go about it, and examples of programming that we've been doing in the, actually, I think all of them last year. So yeah, so I'll still drop a couple of statistics that I found interesting. So we all know that water is an increasing challenge, both in terms of availability and quality. So 36% of world population lives in water scarce area, according to the high-level panel on water. And another statistics I found interesting is that 40% of intrastate conflicts are linked to water, according to UNEP. So a peace-building organization can help link technical expertise and social cohesion. And indeed, peace-building techniques can really support the understanding on the social and economic use for water. So be it agricultural use, in consumption, or in energy. So we know that water is key to livelihood, but it's also key to our economies more generally, and the way humanity sustains itself. So peace-building lens on it can be understanding better the differentiated needs of water resources according to different categories of population or different communities, but can also be key through conflict analysis to understand power relations around attribution of water resources. And another interesting aspect of water for peace building is how it can serve as a technical opportunity for dialogue between different communities or countries that are at odds with each other. So there's this idea that a shared common resources, there's an imperative of collaboration that is not avoidable. So in geopolitical areas where we witness tensions and nations that have difficulty to speak with each other, having this kind of technical approach to creating dialogue and reconciling populations can be very interesting. And this work can be at different scale, so that can be at the inter-community dialogue, So I was about to say like a very granular level, but rather than granular, if we speak of water, we can say at the drop level. It can be a governance issue, so more at the subnational to national dialogue level, or at the global and cross-border level. And I will try in the reverse order to present a few initiatives that we are working on with International Alert now. So the first one is focusing on how can we better bridge hard science and social science, and how can we make better use of data to foster peace. So a key example of this work is the work we've been doing with the Water, Peace and Security Partnership. And here on display is a global tool that has been developed with the particular support of the World Resources Institute and other consortia partners for the Water, Peace and Security Partnership. So this is a global tool that raises attention on key areas that are at risk of conflict related to water. It's a forecast which is based on above 80 indicators and very various indicators. And here we supported in identifying what can be these different indicators. So there are very scientific indicators such as water predictions, seasonal variability. There's also infrastructure indicators, energy, but also communities, migration and conflict indicators. So it's based on machine learning and really serves as to bring attention on which areas in the future can be victims of water-related conflicts. But we also, with the Water, Peace and Security Partnership, have a more focused tools to analyze very localized aspects that I will speak a bit later. Another, at this global level or inter-regional level, another example, here there's the link to this map, so I really encourage you to access it and play with the different indicators. You have a wealth of data on this platform. So a second one, a second research area we recently started in Central Asia is to support local researchers in developing literature. Local researchers in developing dialogue on climate change in Central Asia. So we gathered different researchers from Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan and put them in the same room to speak about climate challenges and how it affects different communities within their countries, but also in border areas with their neighboring country. So that's in light of the tensions that happened between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan last year around water management in a very complicated border areas. And this, so I put here this map, which I'm very sorry it's in Russian, but I really like it because there's very little focus on national borders, but rather focus on water flows. And that's really what we try to do with creating regional voices and that transcend these national borders, and that can speak about climate change, but of course they all spoke and focused on water and transboundary river basins in a conflict-sensitive manner. So the second level and another initiative I'd like to speak about is the work that our team in Tunisia did. And they focused on water as a generator of grievances between local populations and their government. So our team in Tunisia is focusing a lot on various levels of marginalization, and they engage in partnership with human rights organization and l'Observatoire Tunisien de l'eau, so the water observatory, Tunisian Water Observatory, which is more of a technical expert, to focus on water as a human right. So they did an inventory of legislation at the national level, and they trained in a specific region, which is called Kasserine, which is in the periphery. So it's a border region with Algeria. And it faces more deterioration in terms of water access. It's only so 40% of the population in this region is not connected to, doesn't have running water, and they face particular decay of infrastructure. So they did advocacy training for local activists and launched a human rights campaign, but they also engaged institutions at various levels, from very local to ministerial level, at national level, to exchange perspective on water as a human right. And they also did a movie that I really encourage you to watch. It's relatively short, and it really outlays the water challenges that communities face in this region. I'll put the link in the chat later. And finally, I'd like to return to the water, peace and security work that we do very locally and specifically in the inner Niger Delta in Mali. And here it's more, we're working with putting different communities together to explore how to share an ecosystem in a peaceful way, and this in a conflict zone. So the inner Niger Delta is a floodplain, so it's a very specific ecosystem, which is flooded part of the year, and this flooded plain is used by fishermen, agricultures, and pastoralist communities that have an established, used, and habits of working, which is put under a lot of pressure due to climate change, rainfall variation, but also policy decision, infrastructure decision, and mismanagement. And conflict also affects their usual daily life and puts an additional change on that. So of course, with the peacebuilding lens, we had to really understand what are the entry points, and especially in a context where the state is close to failing, there's massive distrust in authorities. But the problem is that the traditional authorities that were running the show in the past years are also increasingly contested, and there's an emergence of alternative armed actors, religious actors or criminal actors that try to establish themselves in this space. So it's very difficult to have an advocacy kind of approach here because legal mechanisms exist, but they are not applied. So through identification of solutions, through participatory systems analysis, we try with other partners to develop specific tools, like how the prediction in the flood regime can help a better repartition of the resources. So we try to identify through local actors solutions and try to scale them, because there's a lot of actors which are present there and a lot of solutions, but that also needs to be owned regionally and nationally. Yeah, and so that's all for the different examples I wanted to talk you through, but that leads me to a couple of conclusions of what a peacebuilding organization should do and what other organizations should do with us. So it's to realize that complex water-related conflicts need complex interventions. And for that, we need better analysis. And this analysis should integrate ecosystems and water in the conflict analysis. We should create integrated approach. So realize that we need a variety of expertise to address water-related conflict. So we need partnerships, and we need clearly detailed and outlined partnerships. And any intervention needs to support and enable informed and inclusive discussions and decision making. So informed by data, projections, and implications of any policy decision, and inclusive in that looking for who's not in the room, who's not around the table, and what are their perspectives as well. So I will keep it here, and I'm open to answer any questions or reflections. Thanks for your attention.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Camille. So at this point, we have seen all presentations by our speakers today. And so I want to turn us all over now to the Q&A portion of our session. We have about 15 minutes left. So if there are questions for the speakers, I encourage you either to put them in the chat and I will field them, or you can raise your hand and answer live if you're not shy. And so while we wait for maybe a couple people to ask specific questions, I'd like to ask a couple of my own. And so Camille, because you were last, I'm actually going to start with you and then I'll work my way backwards. But I'm actually working on a project in the Niger Delta as well. We're doing a partnership between NASA and Mercy Corps. And so I think you and I should probably share you know, how we might be able to connect or integrate some of these considerations. But I wondered, you know, you're talking about some of the challenges that are being experienced currently in the Delta, and then what we're going to see moving forward. I wonder if you're also taking into account, you know, not only future climate scenarios where different, you know, there will be differential impacts to different communities from both a livelihood, but also just a general health perspective, and also the fact that there's these upcoming dams, right, that are in different phases of development that will effectively shut off the Delta and really change the entire hydrologic regime. So if you're working on either of those kinds of components, I'd love to hear more about them.
So actually, I forgot to mention, but the picture you could see on my presentation is a picture of the Jene Dam, which has been opened fairly recently and has been delayed for 4 years, I guess. And so the way we work is we create local dialogue groups. So we have 3 groups in the Delta, in Jene, Kona, and Mopti, and the Jene group is on a daily basis discussing this new dam. And I wanted to show this picture because you could see that on one side there's a lot of fishermen boats that are blocked there and that complain about the upward communities having more access to fish, which is blocked by the data, and the one after the dam not having access to fisheries. But this will have further impacts further down the river. And what we've heard so far from the communities that they don't perceive that yet. So that's why we want to bring this kind of visualization tools to engage at the very local level, this kind of aha moment, like, oh, this decision has been taken. And that's why we insist also on informed decision making, because when there's such a decision for creating an infrastructure, there will be winners, there will be losers. There's no white or black solution. There's no perfect solution. But we believe that there should be a minimum of consultation of impacted communities, not locally, but also down the river flow. And that the decision should be taken with this in an informed way. So with data at hand, an understanding of the different impacts on the different communities. And funnily enough, we also work with Mercy Corps in Mali, not directly in the Delta, but in other areas.
Yeah, I mean, agreed on everything you say. I think that's one of the things, I think in order to get better integrated, we also have to be more aligned or better at integrating like some of the data that's qualitative, right, that you're getting on the ground with some of the more, you know, quantitative data that's coming out of the Earth observation community. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there, but certainly the more we can help people understand, you know, through science and different visualizations, you know, what is likely to happen, the more prepared and informed we can be. So I definitely agree, and I maybe we can share more about our interests offline. So I'd like to turn to Mara and Lydia now, because Mara, you kind of set us up for this larger implication of nature, you know, the rights of nature, and then Lydia gave us an example from the Trato Basin. But Mara, what are the implications for water diplomacy in transboundary and conflict settings as you see them? Because I think as you were talking about some of what you hope to see, you know, I was kind of reminded of like, oh, you know, some of this is already challenging, right? There's already competing interests. A lot of the problems that we see just with resources either not being shared or being polluted and degraded are leading to conflict. And so how do we, you know, how do we manage some of these challenges when it comes to just trying to get human rights at the forefront of, like, you know, sensitive settings, yet also trying to balance something like, you know, the rights of water and the rights of nature. So your perspective on that would be phenomenal. And then, you know, and maybe similarly to Lydia in follow-up, some of what you were saying about the Trato, how do we, what are some of the implications of what you saw there at the international level? And so I think it's almost like, Mara, how do we translate it locally? And then Lydia, how do we translate some of what you're talking about to international levels? Mara?
Yeah, thank you. It is a very challenging question, no, because no, I think that no, we are still no at the beginning, no, of seeing what are no the implication at the international level. So for example, no, no, I didn't mention, but there is all a program, no, at the United Nations sponsored by Bolivia, no, on the no, rights of nature. No, they also promote dialogues between experts on this topic. So, for example, this can be no a way also not to reflect and to see no what can bring this no to the international community at the international level. So. It is. I mean, the first implication it will be no that so how no we can include no the river no could have no a seat in transboundary negotiations. So how no we can do that? No, probably not through the guardians of the river, but then no, the challenge it is how not these guardians are appointed, are representing the national government. So in this case, no, it will not be. We will not go so far in the discussion. But I think, for example, no, we have an example here, no, in Switzerland, where there is an initiative, a local initiative in Geneva on the rights of the Rhone River, so that it is a transboundary river, no, between France and Switzerland, and actually, no, the negotiation on an agreement, no, between the two states are quite no challenging, and maybe no something that we could see in the future if how no if this initiative not from the local communities not that share the river can influence the states saying that we want an agreement on this river, we want an agreement that protect nature. So maybe not these local initiatives can be can play a role for pushing the negotiations in some directions. But yeah, we are still at the beginning of the process, so it is difficult not to give specific answers. And of course, it will depend also on the specific case that we are analyzing.
Yeah, I like that, Mara. I mean, I think it's essentially kind of like taking a grassroots approach, right? Or managing up. You know, if we can get more localized efforts to support these processes and show kind of how it's successful, right, then the hope would be to, you know, have it serve larger processes moving forward, right, or to scale or transfer to other locations. That makes sense. So Lydia, I asked you a question, but I would like to actually defer to a question posed by one of our participants instead. So Uli Beck wrote, in terms of the international level, it would be interesting to hear about barriers in international diplomacy for grassroots, for example, as was the case for participation in COP26. So I think it's kind of a similar component to what I was asking about the implications at the international level, but specifically Uli's asking about barriers when it comes to international diplomacy for grassroots organizations.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think I'll answer jointly because a decade ago, there was already a universal declaration of the rights of Mother Earth. That, of course, is not international law. This was just actually a kind of like a grassroots effort. It was approved in a conference where 35,000 people were present, and it was kind of a symbolic action. And similarly, some organizations are setting up trials where the rights of nature inform, a case to showcase how it could work in real life. And basically, the way I see it is that cases as the Atrato River case are just setting up sort of the precedent or a way in which, if we document and if we can see whether this approach brings new ways or new approaches to sustainable development that actually work for the community on the ground, they can kind of pave the way towards more international action. Some of the barriers that I see for grassroots communities to make a case for the rights of nature to be observed at the international level is definitely the lack of access to international forums, or the kind of the restrictive nature of some of them. But also, even when there are spaces open, so I used to work at the UN, and we would set up dialogues with the Secretary General. And even if you can invite actors, and now with technologies, it's easier to bring some of them to the table. First, there is not a lot of resources to bring them, for instance, physically to New York, or even for them to access remotely because of logistical issues, because of not being able to reach to the right people that want to be at the table. And then there's also a lack of even homogeneity on what do grassroots level movements want from the Declaration of the Rights of Nature, which I think has also made it harder to make a case as to where to push within that movement. Because even working with indigenous peoples in different countries, you realize that their vision and the relationship with nature for them, and how do they understand living in harmony with nature, differs, and differs in the way they want to manage resources. This is why agreeing and pushing for a universal declaration, I think, will also it kind of like represents a barrier for it. And the reason why, probably, if there is ever a declaration per se, it will be very broad, so that then it can be adapted at what happens and what is the context and the idiosyncrasies at the local level, like it was in the case of Colombia.
Excellent. Thank you, Lydia. So Lily, I actually have a question for you because you were talking about some of the challenges that you've seen in Brazil with integrating and also implementing these multilateral environmental agreements, such as the SDGs. And I know that, you know, right now you're seeing a lot of movement from various UN organizations that act as the secretariat to like the Sendai framework or to the SDGs, the new urban agenda, et cetera, going through midterm review processes in order to understand some of the challenges I think that you brought up, and then eventually influence what the future of you know, the next agenda after 2030 looks like, right? Or what the 2030 plus agenda will look like. And so I wondered if you could give us some of the positive approaches that you've seen in Brazil that could contribute to how we could do things better moving forward. Because I think the challenges you mentioned are definitely not unique to Brazil. I see this happen a lot, even when the United States is trying to report to Sendai and report to SDGs. I mean, the indicators are challenging. The data just isn't really there in some cases because so many different agencies have responsibilities for one component of this bigger answer. And so, yeah, just are there any positive examples of how you've seen these better approach so that maybe we can collectively learn from your examples?
I'm so sure if on my speech I gave like a picture that it's kind of, oh, we have no way out, you know, like it was not the intention, because even in Brazil, what I love to work in the water sector in Brazil is exactly because we have a framework that really works as a way to put people together in the same table and discuss and decide things together. It's really participatory, even if logically some policies they complain, they are not heard, like environmental licensing is something very sensitive on this regard. But usually we used to have a very we spent like 20 years building this consensus and national councils, participatory processes in the broad range of public policies. And I totally agree with you. The challenges that I see is not unique to Brazil. I'm sorry if it sounds like this. It's what I see all over the world, because I understand what you say. When we have to do the reports for the conventions, it's a lot of information, technical information, sometimes very difficult to deal with and everybody to understand. But what worries me, it's not just the technical side of the conversation. What I say is exactly that we, policymakers, academia, government officials, we have to think that we are doing something wrong because we are not being able to involve people really and to translate all those indicators and targets, and we will not be able to reach the goals, never, because we just postpone. It's 21 agenda and 2030 and 2050 now, you know, and so on. And we just make reports to say, oh, we could not reach all the targets. And it's kind of tired to see this. And we will just reach the targets when we are able to translate what it means and people really understand and can see their roles in a daily life in small steps, and everybody together is able to do something. So I think we have to just work better in how to translate this to laymen.
I think that's actually well said. And I fully agree. I think Camille does. And so do others most likely, right? Just as we start figuring out one thing, it's on to the next. And so how can we make some of these agreements just more practical and relatable to the things that we can actually show you know, some sort of progress on, and let's not keep moving the needle right before we finally understand something. Well, it looks like we have reached time, and so I just want to thank everyone so much for their participation, to all the presenters for your incredible perspectives. And again, this is on behalf of the Water Interest Group, so if anyone is interested in finding out more about it, please feel free to contact us or Elena, who's now the new chair for the Interest Group on Water. Thanks so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Shanna. Bye-bye.
Merci beaucoup.